A year after Israel's war, Palestinians in Gaza still reel under siege, as international aid convoys are still denied entry to the Strip. But what's really behind this tightened siege, and what's the human cost? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Huda Abdelhamid. Gaza has often been called the world's largest open-air prison. The blockade imposed by Israel since more than 2 years and the strict regulations on the Egyptian border allow for very little to get in or out of the Strip. But almost 80% of Gaza's residents depend on aid provided by the UN and other international organizations. Viva Palestina, humanitarian aid convoy from Europe, currently on its way to the Strip, has hit a roadblock. George Galloway, a leading British politician who is part of the convoy, has repeatedly appealed to Egyptian authorities to allow easy access to Gaza through the Rafah border crossing. The convoy hoped to make it to Gaza by December 27th to commemorate the first anniversary of Israel's war on Gaza. Since then, the crossings into Gaza have been virtually sealed off. Both Israel and Egypt have tightened the restrictions on goods and people, leaving Gazans with little hope to rebuild their lives. Highlighting the hopelessness felt by the Palestinians, UN Chief Ban Ki-moon issued a statement on the one-year anniversary of the war. He said, "The quality and quantity of humanitarian supplies entering Gaza is insufficient, broader economic and reconstruction activity is paralyzed, and the people of Gaza are denied basic human rights." Joining us today to discuss this further, from Gaza, we have Omar Shaaban, an economist and the director of PalThink, a Palestinian think tank. Gideon Levy from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz joined us from Tel Aviv. And from Cairo, we have Aziz El-Kaissouni from Oxfam International. Omar Shaaban, it's been a year since the bombs have stopped falling over Gaza, but the blockade is another form of war against the people of Gaza, isn't it?
I agree with you totally. It's the first time in history that there was a siege and then a war, and the siege continued after the war. Usually, when an area was subjected to a destruction or a war, people of that area are allowed to reconstruct their homes and their institution. Now, Gaza, after 1 year of the destructive war, no single sack of cement was allowed into Gaza. The worst thing, rather than the relief or the humanitarian crisis, is that the mentally physically besieged of the Gaza people. Gaza people have not been able to go out since the restriction was both in Gaza in June 2007. The students are unable to go out. Gaza people, 1.5 million population, feel that they are abandoned by the international community. People in Gaza have been disconnected with the rest of the world. People in Gaza feel that they are alone. There is no real interaction with the rest of the world. It's not about relief, it's not about food only, it's about education, it's about interaction with the civilization over the world. People in Gaza have become uncertain about the credibility of the international community. The international community did very little to pressure Israel to leave the siege. The siege was imposed in Gaza as a collective punishment. It harmed everybody, including the children who did not vote for Hamas. It was too early for them to vote for Hamas.
Aziz Kaissouni, I mean, there have been many calls by the international community to lift the blockade, to allow aid organizations into the Strip to bring much needed goods for the people of Gaza. How difficult has it been since the end of the war to actually bring the goods and supplies needed into the Strip?
Well, it's been virtually impossible, to be absolutely frank about it. I mean, specifically in the area of rebuilding materials, a recent report which we co-authored with a number of other NGOs highlights the specific situation. Before the imposition of the siege in 2007, an average of perhaps 7,400 trucks of construction materials were being led into the Gaza Strip on a monthly basis. Since the imposition of the siege, and specifically actually in the period after Cast led, that's gone down to 41 truckloads of construction materials. This is in a territory that's been heavily bombed and shelled during Operation Cast led and has an urgent need to rebuild critical infrastructure necessary to the maintenance of a dignified and decent standard of living.
Well, Gideon Levy, Are we to read from this that keeping Gaza in ruins is the current Israeli policy?
Unfortunately so, yes. Not only leaving Gaza in its destructions, but also keeping Gaza under siege. I don't see any logic in it, but Israel, the official Israel, claims that as long as Gilad Shalit is not released, Gaza will remain under siege. But nobody, really nobody, had guaranteed that after Gilad Shalit will be released, the siege will be lifted. I'm very skeptical about it and very shameful about it.
Well, Omar Shaban, I mean, Gideon Levy was saying that now the siege is linked to the release of Gilad Shalit, but hasn't it been linked many times to many other factors?
I agree with you totally. Gaza was under siege partially since September 2000. Gaza was devastated many times. There are 6 crossing points with Israel. These 6 crossing points were subjected to partial closure since September 2000. The siege and the boycott was imposed on the Palestinian Authority after Hamas came to power in January 2006, 6 months before Shalit was kidnapped. In Gaza, we say that Shalit is the big prisoner because he put 1.5 million population in the prison. In fact, Shalit and 1.5 million population are in a prison in Gaza. This is a collective punishment. Many Palestinians in Gaza, so many Palestinians in Gaza, want Shalit to be released today, even yesterday, because the price that we pay is extremely high. We lost 600 people immediately after Shalit. The electrical company in Gaza and the infrastructure was demolished after June 2006, after the kidnapping of Shalit. There is no justification of this collective punishment that was imposed in Gaza. The Israeli sources made it clear many times that release of Shalit has no relation with opening the crossing. Gaza depends entirely on the Israeli market, either for export and import. Gaza used to import 8,000 commodities from Israel. Israel allow only for 40 items out of 8,000 items. There is no single export from Gaza. It's not only about preventing Gaza people to go out, but also preventing people from out to come into Gaza. The siege is not about preventing Gaza people to go out, but also Israel doesn't want anybody else to come to see the reality in Gaza. 2 weeks ago, Israel prevented 10 parliament to come to Gaza. This is not a siege. It's about Israel want its own story to be in the international eye and ears. They don't want anybody else to speak differently to their story.
So, El-Kaissouni, when you try getting your convoys into the Strip, what kind of excuses are you given?
Well, specifically on the issue of, for example, water treatment, sewage facilities, the maintenance of Gaza's water networks, that's where we've been facing a very major problem, because so much of that work hinges on the ready supply of cement and plastic pipes, items specifically prohibited by Israeli forces at the checkpoints. As such, we find ourselves forced to reuse whatever is available in Gaza, to use items that are worn, that are not up to specifications, and that's obviously having a manifest impact on the lives of Palestinians. I mean, in the north of Gaza, there's about 8,000 Palestinians who do not have access to piped water. In terms of other issues, food, in terms of the crossings, the Israeli authorities maintain a list, an unannounced list of items that are not allowed into the Gaza Strip. The items change apparently randomly and at whim. So, for example, one day you'll bring in dates and carrots and they'll be allowed in, and another day they're not allowed in because they've just been removed from the list. The list is not maintained in any accessible fashion. It is not transparently maintained. We have no clue what's on it, and that makes it very, very difficult in general for aid agencies to plan the imports required for the Gaza Strip.
Well, Gideon Levy, does the Israeli public and Israeli officials, do they think that Israel has achieved anything through the war and the blockade? Has Israel reached its goals in any way?
In terms of official Israel, they are very convinced that they achieved at least one goal, and this was stopping the Qassams. But I must be frank with you and tell you that people like me believe that this goal could have been achieved also without this horrible war. But they claim, and it's very hard to contradict them, that ever since this horrible war, the frontier is more or less silent, and the settlements around the border with Gaza are peaceful, are living in peace. All the other goals were obviously not achieved. Part of them were admitted goals, part of them were denied goals. For example, weakening the Hamas or even bringing Hamas to be replaced. This was never achieved. Hamas is stronger today than 1 year ago. Every Israeli understands it. Same about Gilad Shalit. Gilad Shalit was not released in this horrible operation and could not be released in this operation. So by and large, we are left with a peaceful Sderot, peaceful border, but it is, first of all, so fragile on one hand, and on the other hand, I truly believe it could have been achieved without the war.
Okay. Well, Omar Shaban, I mean, weakening Hamas was one of Israel's stated goal. Now, yesterday there was some commemoration ceremonies around the Gaza Strip, and according to some of the reports, not many people joined those ceremonies. Is that a sign that actually the people of Gaza are also now looking at their leadership and asking them the hard questions, asking them to be accountable to what is happening to their lives?
I agree with you also for this question. Yes, the Palestinians in Gaza, they start to ask Hamas government and Hamas movement, where are you taking us? Not because the Israeli war. The Israelis should not enjoy this privilege. The Palestinians are aware, the Palestinians in Gaza realize that Hamas is unable to build relationship with the international community. The Palestinians have been patient with Hamas for 2 years. Hamas, people in Gaza were expecting Hamas to make some political compromise with the international community, and they keep asking Hamas what will be the next step. Hamas could not maintain the situation in Gaza forever. There is no reconciliation. There is no peace with Israel. The siege is still there. People in Gaza want to live. But I don't agree that Israel was a reason that Palestinians asked Hamas about this question. It's about the Palestinians are highly educated, and they realize, and they are very aware politically, and they give Hamas a trust in the election 2006, but they reach the conclusion that Hamas need to make fundamental change in its ideology, in its political principle. I think there is a huge dynamic within Hamas movement. There is a lot of, within Hamas itself, want to take Hamas into more moderate situation. Unfortunately, the siege did not allow Hamas to make fundamental change. You cannot expect somebody who is in the prison to make a change. If we want Hamas to change, we should give Hamas more option. Giving Hamas more option will seduce Hamas to make fundamental change. But putting Hamas under the siege, this empowers the radical trend within Hamas itself. And the war against Gaza make people feel that Hamas is good enough, that it was fought by Israel. Israel should take itself out of the Palestinian cause, should give us the freedom to treat freely and to decide for ourselves.
Well, Gideon Levy, I just want briefly, do you agree that actually this kind of policy could make Hamas become more radical and could actually make the younger generation of Gaza have become also more radical?
Undoubtedly, the more despair in Gaza, the more lack of hope in Gaza, the more Gaza will become extreme. It's not only about the Hamas, it's about 1.5 million people who have really no hope, no perspectives, no future and no present. Sure, it will push them more and more to the extreme because, for God's sake, what do they have to lose in their situation? On the other hand, rehabilitation of Gaza, reconstruction of Gaza, prosperity in Gaza could open up new possibilities. Freedom in Gaza could open up new possibilities. But this is a little bit too rational for the Israeli decision makers.
And the impact goes well beyond. While the bombardment of the war has left Gaza in ruins, it has had a greater impact on the future of the children of Gaza. Since the war, the number of babies with birth defects has significantly increased. Doctors believe the toxic waste of bombs, along with the trauma of war, are to be blamed. Shireen Tadros reports. While the bombardment of the war has left Gaza in ruins, it has had a greater impact on the future of the children of Gaza. Since the war, the number of babies with birth defects has significantly increased. Doctors believe the toxic waste of bombs, along with the trauma of war, are to be blamed. Shireen Tadros reports.
Struggling to breathe at just a few days old, this was how we met baby Muhammad, born on the first full day of Israel's assault. 1 year later, we found Muhammad still in hospital. He has cerebral palsy. Doctors say his long traumatic birth amidst the bombing caused brain damage and other complications. His mother, Safat, gave birth in a makeshift clinic, and Muhammad was then taken to hospital. The first time Safat held her only child was the day of the ceasefire.
I was happy when I saw him, but at the same time I felt sad. I wanted to breastfeed him, but he was breathing through a tube in his nose. He wasn't even crying. I just wanted to hear him cry.
Other parents can take their kids out to play or take them to the fun fair. We take our child to the hospital.
Safat had regular scans and ultrasounds during pregnancy. There were no signs of defects. She waited 6 years to have a child, but the day he came into this world, Israel's bombs determined his future.
We've seen these cases a lot more since the war. Because of the difficult and tense conditions at birth, Muhammad came out blue. He lacked oxygen, which led to his brain damage.
A legacy of Israel's assault that hasn't only affected Muhammad and his parents.
According to Palestinian medical sources, Israel's use of toxic weapons and ammunition also poisoned the fetuses of many women who were pregnant during the war. A study by Gaza's main hospital into the months of July, August and September just after the war compared to the same time a year earlier revealed a 50% increase in the number of babies born with birth defects.
Leading Gazan pediatricians backed up this figure and say more research into the types of ammunition used during the war is needed.
It's very important to identify these materials, and we have really to know their toxicity because we are afraid they might get access to the bodies of people and might transmit to different generations, and this by itself is a disaster.
Over 300 children were killed in Israel's war. Many others were injured and will never be cured. A generation bearing the permanent scars of a war they won't even remember. Shireen Tadros, Al Jazeera, Gaza.
And permanent scars that are there to stay. Now, Aziz Kassouni, how deep are the emotional and psychological scars on the people on Gaza, especially on the children who make more than 50% of the population there?
Well, that's not really our main area. I mean, realistically, as an organization committed to development and relief, the areas we can speak about are the general humanitarian suffering, and we can testify to the extent of that. I mean, just the sheer figures are astounding. We're talking about almost 600,000 tons of rubble created in Gaza in the aftermath of the attack. People are just sifting through that rubble, trying to find whatever they can salvage to use. Some of the pipes we end up using undoubtedly probably came from ruins. It's just had an impact on everyday life in every sense. The figures are disturbing. 12% of all deaths among children in Gaza is from diarrhea, and that's due to the poor quality of water they're receiving. The water networks have been disrupted, as have electricity supplies, and that is partially because of the blockade preventing supplies of fuel, whether industrial or even cooking fuel, from entering into the Gaza Strip.
Now, Omar Shaban, Egypt is reportedly also building a wall to block access to the tunnels. Even though they are illegal, they are the lifeline of Gaza. Once that wall is up, how are the people inside Gaza going to be able to have access to anything at that stage?
Unfortunately, the tunnel becomes the main source of life to the Gazans since the blockade. This is why we look at the Egyptian plan to build this siege as a killing step to the Gaza people. This will be a catastrophic situation if the Egyptian build the wall while the Israeli keep the siege. But on the other hand, we should not blame the Egyptian. The problem is the occupation and the siege is not the Egyptian. Israel who has imposed the siege on Gaza, not the Egyptian. The tunnel economy is a destructive to the Palestinian social fabric and to the Palestinian economy. We have a new black economy in Gaza now, born by the tunnel. I think the Egyptian should not allow to build this wall unless the siege is lifted by Israel. I think the Egyptian will not continue to build this wall as long as the Israeli siege is still in place. The international community and the Palestinian should look at the root of the problem. The root of the problem is the Israeli siege on Gaza. Gaza is part of the Palestinian territories. Gaza is, according to the international law, is still under Israeli occupation. Despite the Israeli disengagement from Gaza in 2005, Israel is still responsible for the welfare system of the Palestinian people in Gaza according to the international law. The pressure should put in Israel to leave the siege, not the Egyptian to build the wall.
Well, Gideon Levy, there has been an international outcry during the war and after the war. There have been several reports that have been quite harsh on Israel and what happened during that war. Do you think that these are factors that could push authorities in Israel to rethink their policies?
It's very hard to tell. On one hand, I think that at least the Goldstone report will make the Israeli decision makers think twice and three times before they launch another brutal attack like Cast Lead next time, because they might pay also a personal price. And we faced already scenes like Tzipi Livni, the leader of the opposition, being prevented of traveling to London, and others. On the other hand, I must tell you that all those reports were quite ignored in Israeli public opinion, delegitimized, ridiculized, being described as hostile, anti-Semitic. I mean, Israel was much more busy in criticizing the critics rather than really check itself what Israel should have done. And I'm not sure that the big majority of Israelis have any moral doubts about what happened 1 year ago.
Okay, and my last question to Omar Shaban. These reports were also quite harsh on Hamas, saying that Hamas also has to rethink its policies. Do you think that that will also happen or not?
I think Hamas learned the lesson, and Hamas not only after Goldstone report, but before, after there was serious criticism by the human rights organization in Gaza, through personal contact with Hamas people in Gaza, people show their anger against the behavior of some Hamas members, and I think Hamas, they try hardly in the past few months to build good relation with the community. They realize that Hamas is watched by everybody, by local, by regional, by international community, and they try to be nicer with the people. I think Hamas try to normalize and to be part of the normal political system. I'm not Hamas, I'm not a friend of Hamas, but I think we should give Hamas the opportunity to change and to show the good result. Let's imagine the other proposal, why the international community did not give Hamas a 6-month time for them to change. They impose a closure and boycott immediately on Hamas. They did not give Hamas any time to think or to consider a new political policy.
Well, we have reached the end of the program. Thank you to our guests for joining us today. In Gaza, Omar Shaban; in Tel Aviv, Gideon Levy; and in Cairo, Aziz El-Kaissouni. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.